And in it was a handwritten note by von Richthofen that said, "In the event I do not return, Captain Reinhardt shall assume command of JG-1." This is Willy Reinhardt. And the thing I love about this picture, and all these guys, they could be sitting in the airplane cockpit. They've got a cigarette in their mouth. And it's not just the Germans, the French, the Americans, the Brits. No, some of the Brits had pipes, okay, but they all smoked around the airplane. You know, FAA just must love seeing this picture, you know. Reinhardt had been a pre-war soldier. He was very well respected by the men at the time that he took over command of JG-1. I think he was an 8 or 10 victory ace. And so he assumed command of the premier fighter unit in the German Air Force at that time. Well, when you are the leader of JG-1, you get invited to participate in the fighter trials. And so on July the 3rd, Reinhardt was invited back to Johannisthal, which was an airfield just outside of Berlin. There, he was the third person to fly this airplane, which is a Dornier Zeppelin Lindau biplane, which had duralumin skin and was one of the first in World War I to do so. Now, as I said, there were 2 people who flew the plane before Reinhardt. The pilot who flew the plane just before Reinhardt was the ambitious, politically connected leader of Jasta 27, Oberleutnant Hermann Göring. Göring brought the plane in, threw the keys to Reinhardt. Reinhardt takes off, gains some altitude, does a hammerhead, spins, pulls out of the spin, top wing comes off the plane. Reinhardt crashes. 2 weeks later, the new commander of JG-1 is an up-and-coming, politically connected squadron commander by the name of Oberleutnant Hermann Göring. Now, you can't say categorically that Göring became who he became because he just happened to finish the war as the commander of Germany's preeminent fighter squadron, but it probably didn't hurt. More importantly, if Reinhardt had flown second and Göring had flown third, what would the world be? Thank you very much, folks.
We have time for a few questions if anybody has any questions.
Be happy to answer as many as you would like to ask. Feel free.
Please repeat the question so we can get it on the video. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Oh boy, I'm probably the least qualified person in this room to answer that question. Basically, it wasn't a straight shot. Basically, it's like shooting a duck. The duck's flying across. You don't aim at the duck, you aim ahead of the duck. And that's what Brown was having to do because he knew he was he was going to traverse them at right angles. He knew he was going to have a window of opportunity about a second long. And as it turned out, he probably missed behind. Anybody else? Yes, dear. Let me put my glasses on. This is going to help. I'll tell you exactly what he wrote. Let me see if I remember it. Wenn ich nicht zurückkomme, soll der Hauptmann Reinhardt Jagdführer sein. That's exactly what he wrote. In pencil. He wasn't married. He loved his dog. We know he loved his dog. That was it. You know, again, this is a man who was about duty, okay? If I don't come back, what's the best thing for the wing, okay? Captain Reinhardt. That's it. After that, that's all he worried about. Yeah. Yes, sir. Not in that area. The Americans at that time, well, they had already been in the theater in 1917, but American flight operations were almost all down on the French front. Now, having said that, there was an American member of 209 Squadron, Oliver Boots Laboutier, who actually went to our first league set. We have biannual meetings in the league, and the first one we had was in Washington, D.C. in 1985, and he was there, along with several other aces, George Vaughn, Doug Campbell, and Ray Brooks. But von Richthofen almost flew exclusively against, he had one American victim. George Halliwell Harding was from Minneapolis and was flying with 73 Squadron in a Sopwith Dolphin and was shot down by von Richthofen late March, early April on the Somme front down there. But he had gone north to Canada and joined the RAF there, as a lot of people did. Questions? Oh, you guys are easy. Come on. I'm not going to get an airplane question.
I got one. Was there any Bavarian Motor Works engines in the early World War I airplanes? Because
Yes.
they started out making airplane motors.
Yeah, they did. The Fokker D7 especially put out the engine. I mean, most engines were the Mercedes 160 to 180 horsepower. That was the kind of the staple engine for German aircraft, if it wasn't a rotary, of course. But BMW came out with an engine in the summer of 1918 that was put in the Fokker D7, which was the plane that von Richthofen was desperately hoping to get to the front, because the triplane was really somewhat out of date against what the Allies were putting up in the spring. And that engine, I think, was 180 horsepower, but was also compressed. So it gave a lot of power at high altitude, and I don't have to tell you guys, altitude affects the performance of an engine, especially when you only have 200 horsepower. So yeah, they had a compressed engine they put out, and there was also a Maybach engine at the end of the war that was being used in the D7. Yes, sir, in the back. Yeah, it's supercharged, basically.
Did any World War I fighter stand out as the best fighter? I think like in World War II we had the B-51 and the Corsair.
Most people will tell you the Fokker D7, especially when you got the good BMW engine in it, because it had thick airfoil, but it was still really fast, 135 miles an hour. You're talking 20% more than you were getting out of airplanes that spring. It had so much lift it could really hang on its prop, and the German pilots used to fly up under the bomber formations, just hang on the prop and shoot. That plane, and this was told to me by a guy who owns one and knows how to fly them, was probably 10 years ahead of its time. I mean, others that were really good. The Spad was really fast, but it was really thin airfoil. And even a lot of the Americans who got killed late in the war in Spads were trying to turn fight with the D7s, and they just couldn't hold their altitude in a turn, even with all the horsepower. Mm-hmm. He wasn't the first American killed. Quentin Roosevelt died July the 17th, 1917. His plane crashed outside of a little village called Chamery. I've been to his crash site. If you're going to be in this stuff, you got to go to these places because they're really cool. He was not the first pilot from the 95th to die. He was certainly the most famous. And against their better judgment, the Germans actually made a big deal out of his death. There's a postcard, and you can find the picture of it anywhere. He had been shot in the head and was basically dead in the air, but when the plane crashed, of course, it compacted pretty good, and it had taken his legs off, and they pulled him out of the cockpit and laid him on the ground and took pictures and made a picture postcard of it. But it really backfired because the German people went, this guy's the youngest son of a president. He's out here dying in battle. Wow. But he flew a Newport 28. Yeah, that was an interesting plane. The French hated it so much that rather than scrap it, they just sold it to the Americans. So, and they flew that plane until basically the summer of 1918 when they were finally able to buy Spad 13s, which was a great fighter. In the backs. There's several. United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, Air Force Museum. There's a great collection at Boeing Field in Seattle that used to belong to Frederick Champlin, that used to be in Mesa at Falcon Field. It's a very good private collection down at Paso Robles. A few other museums. Planes of Fame has some World War I aircraft. San Diego Air and Space has 4 or 5. Old Rhinebeck has a good collection, and they fly them, and they do a lot of shows in them. I mean, a lot of their planes are kind of long in the tooth, and the place could use a few dollars, but they still fly there. And they actually have a great Sopwith Camel, and they have a great Pfalz D3.